Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Inside the Attack Surface, our new webinar series. We're excited to have you with us today. My name is Liz Syka, and I'll be your host. I'm joined by Derek Christage from Sedara, who will walk us through today's topic. Today's session is titled, What to Expect in Your First 30 Days. We are going to answer the question of what actually happens after you deploy attack surface management. Here's how today's session will flow. Derek's going to lead us through about 25 minutes of content, and then we're going to open it up for live Q&A. We encourage you to participate through this session. If a question comes to mind, please add it to the Q&A panel at any time, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can at the end. As for housekeeping, just a few quick notes before we begin. The session will be recorded, and we'll share the recording with you afterwards. If you have any technical issues, please message us in the chat. As mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end, so submit your questions. We will not identify you, but if time permits, we'll do our best to address them. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Derek.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Derek, and today we're going to be going through, as Liz mentioned, inside the attack surface and what's the first 30 days look like post-deployment of Sedara's attack surface management platform. All right, so first off, as Liz mentioned, this is going to be a series of different podcasts around covering kind of different value points and how to use the platform. Today, we really just want to start with talking a little bit about what the platform is, why it's important, and what the experience is going to be like for the first few weeks. So first off, thinking about why attack surface management? What does this really do? What are organizations struggling with that this is going to help with? So, these days, one of the things that we see quite often is that it's not that there's a lack of security tools in almost any environment. It's really about the lack of ability to coordinate the information in all of those, about managing the configuration drift across all of those, and overall creating kind of a centralized view of not only just all of your assets and where they exist, but what's the current security state of them. And even more important, I'd say that we run into all the time is, you have your key security tools, right? You have your SIEM, you have your content spam filters, you have your advanced endpoint tools, EDR, vulnerability management, right? Things that you think about that are, more traditional vulnerability or security stack type tools. But more and more, we have these key business applications, right? Your general cloud infrastructure, your RMM tools, AI usage within the organization, right? Who has access to actually use AI and prompt inputs and outputs. Business productivity apps, right? Your Salesforces, your ADP payroll, your third-party business applications that are an important part of your day-to-day, but are tied to your individual assets. But maybe tied to different identities, right? And then factor in, bring in just the basic things that have been around forever, right? Active Directory and the controls that come with that, group policy, basic tiering structure of an organization of assets within it. And then, again, stack on Entra on your cloud environments where you have all sorts of ability to apply control and limitation policies that all add to your overall security posture and really need to be thought about as part of your security tool stack, even though they're not traditionally managed by, I'll say, a traditional cybersecurity team or security engineering, right? There's usually a thought process of some of these are IT and some of these are security and some of these are compliance, right? So we have this growing need in the industry where you have the spread of tools that are much more accepted and approachable across large teams, but you have a growing separation across all of these tools. So attack surface management is really designed to bring all of these things together, create a baseline inventory of your environment in terms of what the assets are, the identities behind all of those assets, who the people are that are using these, what is all the usernames for that one person, because that's the identity, right? It's not about just this user account logged in from somewhere. It's about who is this user, what are all the controls across all of these types of tools that are going to protect them, and what are the current state are they in, right? So we're going to talk about the first 30 days of what that looks like. So as part of, just thinking through the process, right, we connect to all of your security tools here. Step one is deployment, right? Absolutely, important part of getting any tool up and running is deployment. So we'll connect to all of your tools here. We send them into, this is where all of this data goes into the attack surface management platform. right? So we're pulling in all of this inventory, all the asset data, as much configuration information as possible. A lot of the policies in I'll say groups, right? The controls that are designed to create a separation of duties and appropriateness of access for users, right? We're bringing all of those types of things in to analyze those against best practices through vendors, to analyze those against compliance frameworks, to analyze those against internal policies, right? And what did we say we're going to do, and how do we prove that we're doing it on a near real-time basis? And then create our remediation roadmap in terms of identifying detections, right? And then pushing these out to actual risk items to manage. And then we measure this long term, right? As I mentioned, configuration drift is a real world problem nowadays, right? That if hey, these tools were perfect when we deployed them. 2 years later, right, day-to-day usage creeps in, and policy usage maybe is not as clean as it used to be. Right, maybe group membership has drifted because of certain projects that were maybe are ongoing, but we still need to know about lack of security in certain areas, even if it's tied to a valid project, right? So all of these things that are tied to day-to-day activity, are absolutely part of what we want to be able to measure, but also be able to keep an eye on what it has day-to-day activity done to the current state of security and/or compliance, right? So at the end of the day, what you get with this is full visibility across the environment, across a number of teams, I guess I'll say, and we'll show that in some of the use cases, and then prioritized risk and fast remediation. And we'll show that, a couple examples called the low-hanging fruit of things that we should be able to see within the first few minutes of deploying this. And then the goal is really the long-term measurable security outcome of the environment. So as I mentioned, deployment is step one. So we'll talk about connecting the environment. So when I talk about all of your tools, right, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is part of what we call our integration ecosystem, right? So these are the types of tools that we see day in and day out that customers are using. And basically what we say is if it's not on this list and it's a pretty standard product, it's probably already supported. And if it's not there, we'll get it built and added in. But the point being is really starting to look at all the different categories here. And then, again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. This doesn't, especially cover a lot of the kind of less frequent, more nuanced third-party vendors and things like that are absolutely becoming more and more important in here to understand, again, where the risk lies with some of those accounts and managing some of these. So these are the types of systems that we're connecting to and bringing all of this data in. So I'll jump right into the demo because I think, or the webinar demo portion of the webinar here, because I think that's kind of the best majority of why we're here. So I'll touch base real quick. This is a demo system again, but I'll talk about our deployment piece right here. So as I showed a short list of all the integrations. Again, this is a demo system here, so some of these aren't connected in real time, but this is where you come in to deploy most of these. Now, we aim to keep this extremely simple. So there are no agents for deployments. Most of these are basic service accounts and/or API credentials. So most of these only take a few minutes to configure. Some of the, I'll say, more nuanced and complex ones when you get into the AWS and Microsoft environments get a bit more complicated in terms of permission sets. But by and large, you're talking about basic API access still. Basic read, and in some cases, write permissions. But I'll take a quick scroll through the rest of the list here that there's, again, by no means an exhaustive list here. This is just what's turned on in these instances. But what you start to see is a list of all sorts of different, not only traditional security stack tools like your SIM and your endpoint, your vulnerability, MFA, but it's absolutely pushing into this day-to-day IT functions and IT business apps like cloud, like some of the OpenAI and Anthropic AI business process tools, right? Your network layer tools, right, at the FortiGate, spam and content filters, right? These are the types of things that are absolutely important to get visibility into when we're ultimately trying to get full visibility across the organization and the current state of all of our security tools. So the second you enable each of these integrations, they're going to start pulling this data in. So it takes a bit of time for this to normalize. Now you'll start to see data populate immediately. Some of the tools or some of the integrations do throttle us, like the Microsoft and Google Clouds, throttle some of our API access. So it does take a bit of time for some of these to populate. But within, the first couple hours, I'll say, even if some of these other tools are continuing to populate through their API throttling limitations, right? This is the sort of stuff you're going to see on your initial dashboard, right? You're going to get a snapshot of all of your devices, users, groups, tier zero assets. If anyone's familiar with the Microsoft enterprise security architecture model, right, of identifying your really critical assets, where, what are the admin accounts, the root accounts, the accounts that have, either the keys to the kingdom or real close to it, or a very short path to get there, right? These are the accounts, groups, policies, computer objects and assets, right? When we say asset, it's really all of those types of things. It's an asset is not just, hey, just a computer object. It's a laptop sitting on a desk somewhere, right? These are all the even digital assets, the security certificates, right? These are the types of things that go into identifying who has critical access. We make sure and try and call some of those things out. So within the first 24 hours, you're going to have your first full run, all of the correlation done, assuming all of your integrations have been set up, right? And this is the sort of snapshot that you're going to get is kind of these quick numbers around your environment, right? Now these, again, this is a demo environment, but if you come in here on a day-to-day basis, right, you're going to see the trending on these types of things, right? This is meant to give you a basic indicator of, hey, should our device count be going up or down, or should it be pretty flat? Right. You're not seeing a big jump in a small environment like this. Is a very, very, very small sample environment here. But these are meant to be indicators. Once these are normalized, right, you should start to see, especially tier zero assets, is not something that should be changing on a daily basis. Again, factoring usage of PAM systems and things like that. But this is, the basic snapshot you're going to get of your key detections and all of your assets. I'll take a quick step back here and just talk about in terms of the setup here, right? This is the CrowdStrike example of how we set this up. Very simple prerequisites in terms of access. We have a detail, and I'll show we have a detailed API instructions here of how to configure these. It's a pretty quick process. This only takes a couple of minutes. But what I wanted to highlight here is the type of data that this platform collects, right? Because this is going to change depending on the type of integration that you're setting up. And we have all kinds of different integrations supporting different types of data pulls. But again, this is all going into telling the full story. We're pulling in individual sensors or host names. CrowdStrike called them sensors, but these are your assets, your computer objects that these are installed on, right? We're pulling in your prevention policy so we can start to assess those. We're pulling in configurations for device control and firewalls and responsibilities, our ability to respond to individual incidents and how those are configured. And all of this is going to go into configuration assessment, drift evaluations, best practices assessments, those types of things. So I'll pivot back to here. So again, you get your quick snapshot once these are configured, and I'll jump right to our assets page, and then we'll talk through our detections, which is going to be really kind of where you're going to spend most of your time in your first week or so. And then we'll jump to our AI risk module here and really kind of talk about what your next few weeks will kind of look like, balancing your detections with the risk items as well as the remediation playbooks that come with those. So if we jump to assets, right, this is, I'll call this unstructured asset data, right? So this, usually what we find on initial deployment is this is, a lot of things that tend to jump out at people, right? And even in this view, again, this is unstructured. There are no filters applied. All we're looking at is simply the devices that are in the environment, right? And typically this, I'll say, on first deployment starts to raise a couple eyebrows. But also is where we tend to, kind of start to point into this discussion of what the first 30 days looks like of, hey, yeah, great. These things are jumping out at you. We'd like to remediate. Hey, I didn't know I had Windows 7 on the environment still. And we look at this and go, all right, well, it's inactive in AD. Tenable hasn't scanned this in 30 days. It's active in CrowdStrike. So good. We have endpoint coverage on it. This is probably a remote system, right? If it hasn't been active on the network for a while. Now how do we figure out from there, right? So I can speak more to that, but these are the types of things that tend to jump out, right? Hey, why is this asset quarantined in CrowdStrike? Is this part of an active incident or an active project, right? Hey, this one is lacks protection. If we look at this, this means it's got a protection policy, but maybe it's not a high enforcement. So these are the types of things that tend to really jump out at people when we go through this process or first deployment. The big one I'll point out here is what you start to see is immediately is the cross section of where these assets are discovered from and where they might be missing. And I'll come back to some of those detections, but even in this case right here, you'll see if it's got a green circle, it means it's active. If it's grayed out, it means it hasn't been enabled or seen in that system in more than 30 days. So so this is inactive, and this one is completely disabled or considered disabled in that system, right? So you start to see some of these of, hey, some of these aren't covered by our content filter, or this one has CrowdStrike, but no other system knows about this asset. Why is that, right? So these are the types of things that really jump out at you. Now we take, the initial step to really build this into detections, and I'll jump there because this is, what was designed to really help organize, your first few weeks or even first couple of days of, hey, here's the low-hanging fruit built into these pre-saved queries, right? So, hey, here's inactive tier 0 accounts, and then we start to prioritize these by severity and priority to help you understand the risk. Now, I can come into any one of these. I can look at the details here, right? And it gives us some information on trending. Has this changed in the last period of days? What is some information about how Microsoft looks at tier 0 accounts? Some basic recommendations on remediation. But if I just go ahead and launch this, right, it's just going to take me right to the page, right to that query. Hey, here's these assets. These are considered tier 0. I can maybe jump in and look at their group membership. Okay, I can see they're an enterprise admin. So now I understand why they're tier 0, right? That's pretty critical. But they're inactive. Why is that? Can we just get rid of these, or do these need to be there for a reason? Or hey, let's have that discussion about what these detections mean. So in your first 30 days, you're going to have a lot of these low-hanging fruit type detections, right? Of, hey, active devices missing EDR. We saw some examples of that in the unstructured search. If I just launch this, pretty clear picture of, hey, here's all the systems. Now you start to look at the correlation, you start to realize that there may be a different reason of why they're missing, right? There's a couple different scenarios here of, hey, these are inactive in AD, cloud-based content filters working, no Tenable. These are probably all remote assets here that have not checked in a while. So we know they're active because of content filter, but we have no antivirus on these in terms of all of what our integrations are telling us. And it's probably important to mention here, this supports multiple integrations. If you're running 10 different antiviruses across your organization, we don't actually care. What we care about is it installed? Is it healthy? Is it in a policy that's protecting it appropriately for the level of risk of your organization? What the flavor is, we don't actually care, right? So as far as this detection goes, this will work across multiple systems. And we do see that in scenarios like this. If I looked at this and I said, hey, this is an Azure and we know other controls, it says VM, maybe this is a virtual desktop, right? Maybe we're covering this with Microsoft Defender, but if we have Defender connected, it's going to show up right here, right? And our Defender policies and everything protecting it is going to show up pretty quickly. So that's your low-hanging, I'll call it your low-hanging fruit detections, right? We have our foundations ones, we have our engineering, a whole bunch of engineering detections. You're going to get a set of detections for every integration. And today we're just focusing on the first couple of weeks and kind of these low-hanging fruit ones. But if you have Okta connected, you're going to have some best practices and detections for Okta. If you have Duo connected, if you're using Veeam backup system, it doesn't matter what the integration is. We have some best practices and detections of, hey, here's some risky configurations or risky status of those types of systems, and here's how they relate to other environments. Now, I'll take this a step further and go and look at our AI risk module here, right? So this is going to take all of your assets, all of the detections that we've already looked at in the environment, and this is where we're going to start to break this down into more of a risk management process. Now, it's still taking those detections and that data in, but what we're going to do here, and I'll go through this very quickly for the sake of time, but we're going to, as part of deployment, ask you to fill in, and we'll typically pre-populate the majority of this, right? And this is something you can fine tune over time, but we're going to fill in the basics for context. We're going to add in your healthcare, what's your industry, right? If it's health, call it healthcare, right? If it's what's your organization size, right? So maybe some descriptions that's pertinent to your business that can go into the real-time AI-based assessments, your risk tolerance, your security team, internal and external teams with MSSPs or MSPs doing, other services, right? Your compliance frameworks, your tech stack. as well as your crown jewel assets, right? So we spend a few minutes filling this out because this is going to go into real-time risk assessments of these detections and factor these in. And this is where you get your risk register, right? So you get your basic AI risk here, which gives you an AI contextual brief. If you're the person responsible for reporting security issues to your organization, right? To management, to leadership, to other teams, right? Helping to justify why we need to take on some of these projects or configuration changes, right? This is meant to give you some additional context, and this changes every single day, right? As you make changes, right? You get some basic understanding of what categories are some of our risk items in, right? Right, and as well as some reporting on which ones are in remediation, active remediation. But ultimately, we're building our risk register here. So if I pick on one of these, right? So I'll start right at the top. This one, schema admins has a group has members, right? It's a basic recommendation of it shouldn't have members. So and again, I'll try and put this into context. Your first 30 days, there's a lot of things that just jump out at you, especially on the detections page of, hey, this shouldn't be that way. I understand why I don't want critical assets in these groups, right? This might not be a complex one for a lot of organizations. But once you get kind of cleaning up a lot of this stuff in the first 30 days, some of these do get more complex. And that's where, if you open one of these, this is where we start to provide a lot more information, especially adding in your context of why this becomes important, right? What compliance controls are these tied to? If and when compliance is important, right? If your CMMC or high trust is obviously very pertinent in the healthcare industry, so you're given a lot more information about why this is important. We can start to accept or mark this as in remediation with some notes here, and we can talk about more advanced workflows in a later webinar of integrating with change control systems and things like that. But this right here is going to give us in this case, it's pretty easy. Schema admins, let's just go remove the group, right? But if it's a bigger project, you might want to track evidence and things like here. Or in these cases, if I'll launch a playbook and come over to, I lost it. Let's go here and we'll launch this playbook. This is where AI steps in and help. The AI risk element is going to take context as well as other inputs from the system and build your more personalized playbook for this remediation. Now, in this case, we're just removing an asset from a group. So I'll let this load as AI does its thing there. But I'll come back to this here real quick. If you look at our playbooks, right, this playbook was launched from an individual risk item that's going to build a more specific and prescriptive remediation process for it. But if you look here, we have a lot of playbooks, right? There's a lot here, and we start to identify these as the level of effort as well as criticality in some cases, or what they're tied to. Is it a system level? Is it account level, right? Is this hours for remediation versus days versus if I come down here to end of life operating systems, right? This is a project for remediation, right? There's a lot that goes into replacing an end-of-life operating system. It's not a simple fix in a lot of cases, right? So we really try and call out what that means. And if I come back to this playbook here for schema admins, right? Again, we don't have a whole lot of time today to go through all these, but really starting to highlight the level of depth that these detections and risk items go to helping you identify the long-term remediation of these. So here's your commands for if you want to validate the data we've told you, right, to go and an audit and assess on yourself, you can do that here. Otherwise, ASM is already pulling that for you. Right, here's all the removal processes, and we'll cover at a future webinar our ability to actually go and make these changes in the system or workflows as well. But again, it starts to talk about documentation process and recommendations. There's really quite a lot here on the remediation side, right? As well as verifying the results have been completed. And if we go back to our risk register, then we could then have marked it as having been remediated, right? If this ever changes and comes back, the system's going to bring it right back as a risk, right back as another detection. So the big highlight there, right, is that we're and I'll scroll through this example here. See a lot of the similar detections that we had brought in here, but when we start to get into the more complex ones around Kerber roasting and TLS versions and policies applied through content filters for remote users, right? You start to get into much more complex scenarios. And even if I kind of scroll all the way to the bottom here, right? So some highlights, again, some maybe some basic ones, but ones that don't always jump out at you, right? Dual phones without screen lock, right? And this, pretty basic policy change, and especially if this is a configuration you're used to. Hey, here's the three systems that don't have a strict policy or against the current policy in Duo, right? So we're starting to really just bring this stuff front and center and let you track some of these things in long term, right? Azure VMs without TPM with TPM disabled, right? And again, we won't have time to go through necessarily all of these, but the point is that in your first 30 days, right, what you're going to do, what the process you're going to go through, right, is that initial configuration. Within the first few hours, typically you're going to get AD in your basics. It may take a bit of time to get some of the more complex integrations, especially if you have a lot of systems, right, managed by multiple teams. It's really just about getting that API or remote access to those systems. But you're really going to see a lot of that initial data populated in the first couple of days, a lot of low-hanging fruit and things that really just jump out at you. But the first couple of weeks, that's what we typically advise, right? Is spend time with these detections, spend time with the ones that are low-hanging fruit that you're maybe in control of. Hey, we didn't think this was there. We just need to clean this stuff up, right? I'll pick active devices with end-of-life operating systems, right? Is typically another good one of, hey, we know these are active on the environment. Are these tied to an upgrade project, or can we just get rid of these systems? Right. These are pretty self-explanatory from the low-hanging fruit side. We maybe don't need to get into the full managed risk elements on some of these. But as you mature through that process in the first 30 days and start to clean a lot of these up, right? Inactive user accounts is a super common one of hey, these are enabled in the environment, but they're not active, right? And if we run this, we start to see I'll say some trends, or I'll say lack of trend is the right word. Of these aren't all in one spot is really the point of, hey, this one's in AD, it's enabled. This one's disabled in AD, but it's enabled in Entra, right? This one's is enabled in AD and it's enabled in iBoss content filter, right? This one is not even an AD at all, enabled or disabled. It's just enabled in Entra. So there's different reasons for why these may be here, right? I mean, this could be indicative of onboarding, offboarding processes and things like that. But these are the low-hanging fruit things you're going to spend time looking at. And then as you mature that process over the next few weeks, you should find yourself spending more and more time with the managed risk register, really starting to track these things, putting them into an open or remediated and process status, right? And really start to track these, as well as kind of managing and helping to propagate these playbooks and the intentions of them out to the wider team. So I see Liz coming back online. That means my time's just about up. I'll see if we have any questions, and we'll get ready to wrap things up here.
Yeah, so again, feel free to put anything in the Q&A that you have. And thanks, Derek. That was a great overview with a lot of helpful information. So moving into the Q&A, I have one question listed. It says, how long does deployment typically take?
Right. So as I mentioned, deployment is meant to be pretty straightforward. We try and keep this as simple as possible. As I mentioned, there is no agents for this system. So it's API based and service accounts, right? However, how long does it take you to create a service account in Active Directory? About 30 seconds, and that's up and running. Now we do deploy if you have existing Sedara hardware on-prem, this will be your jump point for that for managing credentials. If not, there is a virtual machine that gets deployed on site, a virtual appliance that deploys as a virtual appliance. So we'd give you that virtual appliance to deploy, and that's the interface for managing all of these credentials, which is why some of these don't show up. But as long as it takes you to create API access for these types of technologies is basically how fast it takes to integrate some of these. So they're pretty straightforward. They're meant to be very low lift. A typical deployment should go relatively quickly, again, depending on how many different teams and how many integrations you're talking about. But each integration itself should be fairly quick and straightforward.
Outstanding. We're almost at the end of our time. So again, thank you so much for walking us through that, Derek. And thank you to everyone who joined us to spend a part of your day with us.